Today I'd like to talk to you about a number of different things that are going on with drug quality in our business. And what I will not be talking to you about is higher order structure, glycoform analysis, pressure flow, relationships, nominal water permeability, or KLA. I'm going to be talking about a lot of the other stuff, the things that I think we need to get our heads around to be able to more facilely and readily move toward giving medicine to sick people. First, the disclaimer, okay? Presentations or views of the speaker. If you want to find out what the FDA thinks for real, go to fda.gov. Thank you very much. Also, I gave a talk earlier this week in the process validation track, and I observed that I tell my daughter to only give your email address to your friends. So we were all friends, and so many people came up to me afterwards and said, oh, I'm so glad we're friends because I have your email address, and I'm waiting to see what arrives in my inbox next week. But nevertheless, it's there for a reason. Okay, so many of y'all know Steve Koslowski, and Steve tells a great story about this fella that's standing in a field, okay? And he's standing in the field, and over the horizon comes this big old hot air balloon. And the fella throws out an anchor, and it kind of drags to a halt. And the fella in the balloon's pointing in the direction that the wind was blowing, that he was going in, yells down at the fella in the field, says, hey, do you know what direction that is? Do you know where I am? And the fella down the field looks up and says, well, as a matter of fact, I do. And he tells him what direction that is to great detail, how many degrees, north, northeast, relative to the magnetic pole, to the actual pole, and relative to the declension of the solar system. And then he goes through and tells him where he is, and gives him the GPS coordinates. He gives him longitude and latitude down to a whole bunch of seconds, and then tells him exactly where he is relative to the 5 major population centers in the world. And the fellow in the balloon looks down and says, well, you must be in the pharmaceutical industry. And the guy in the field says, well, as a matter of fact, I am. Why do you say that? He says, well, I asked you a fairly simple question, and you gave me a detailed, accurate, and complete description with way more information and detail than I wanted, presented in a way that totally leaves me exactly where I was and didn't answer my question. And the fellow down the field says, well, you must be in the FDA. And the guy in the balloon says, well, I am. How'd you know that? He says, well, you arrive blowing hot air. You don't know where you're going. You don't know where you are. You ask me questions, I answer them. You don't understand my answers, and apparently all of that's my fault. Now, what's interesting about that story is it works if you swap who's in the gondola and who's in the field, depending upon your audience, right? And that's important too. Because we're all in the gondola and we're all in the field. We're all trying to figure out how to get on with it because we're not in the business of submitting, reviewing, and answering questions and responding to documents and inspections. We're in the business of making medicine and getting medicine to sick people. But boy, we spend a lot of time with questions and answers and talking past each other. Our challenges are not because we suddenly discover we accidentally picked the wrong resin. Holy cow, I should have been at pH 4. You know, sometimes that happens. That's not what slows us down. It's the other stuff. So I'd like to talk to you about the other stuff, if you'd indulge me, and share some ideas with you. I want to suggest to you that the environment in which we work is one of assertion, assessment, and assurance, and that is not a simplification. It looks like a radical simplification, but it's not. Assertion, assessment, assurance. You cannot define an assertion as valid, as meaningful, in the absence of assessment and assurance that it will be stable throughout the lifetime of its consideration. And you can't really define assessment in the absence of an assertion or of assurance of ongoing relevance of the principles upon which that assessment were made. And you really cannot provide any assurance in the absence of assertion or assessment. All 3 of those are in many ways discrete and in many ways infinite. I recommend to you Jim Carson's book, Finite and Infinite Games. Research is an infinite game. Business is a finite game. It has rules that we play within. One has a beginning and end and a discrete score. The other you win by continuing to play. And we as biotech jocks play infinite and finite games all at the same time. And this assertion, assessment, and assurance is hard because you can't break it into the building blocks and address each building block independently. The old saw of a three-legged stool, okay? You can't just focus on one leg, you're gonna have a problem. If you have one weak leg, you're gonna have a problem. But also in the three-legged stool, this right here, does that work? How about that? It doesn't. This right here is an old stool. This is a really, really old Chinese stool. Things haven't changed that much. You still sit on the same part of your body that you used to sit on, and you still have the same requirements for a stool. Okay? It needs to be stable, it needs to be balanced. And the stool, the legs are strengthened by supports in the middle that mutually support one another. And I can beat this analogy into the ground. I'm not going to spend your time on it, talking about documentation and data and whatever. But we're talking about this space of assertion where a company comes in and says, we know what we are doing. We know our process and we know our product. And more importantly, we know our risk and we know what we don't know. And there's a mutual assessment. The company shares the assessment they themselves have done. And here's the data which show we actually run that way. And those assessments are judged by external folks. It could be a parent company. It could be your QA group. It could be the Food and Drug Administration and another regulatory authority. And then there's the assurance that as we move forward, we're going to continue to learn, but that assurance stays the same. And that is not easy. That's hard because it's a space that moves through time. So let's talk about how this plays out in a lot of different areas. Now, I gave a talk earlier this week. I'm not going to repeat it. I may repeat a couple of slides. But this is process validation. Process validation, we all know, is not an experiment. Process validation is making an assertion, is being an advocate that in a data-driven way, I know what I'm doing. I know how this process is going to perform, and I know what the product's going to look like. And then it's an assessment. Here's the data, which shows I can actually do it. And then here's the assurance. By virtue of the quality systems, the good engineering systems, the oversight that I have, here is a reasonable level of assurance. Nobody has a crystal ball. Here's a reasonable level of assurance that I will continue to meet those expectations. This is reflected in the guideline on process validation. Take off your glasses, let your eyes go out of focus. When you look at process design, process qualification, continued process verification, you're looking at an assertion. Okay? You're looking at an assessment, and you're looking at assurance that's going to be valid moving forward. The whole schmear, okay? That's process validation, not this Lego, that Lego, the third Lego, the whole, for want of a better term, stool, okay? You've heard me talk about define, demonstrate, document, maintain. What does it look like when it runs correctly? Show me that it runs that way, write it down, convince me it's going to stay that way. It's the same thing. I know how to boil an egg. The QBD talk that we're not going to do is about how big the pot has to be and is it relevant and how long you have to boil it and is it relevant, how many eggs can be in there and is it a hen egg or an ostrich egg. That's the QBD talk. We're not doing that one. I know how to boil an egg, okay? And I boiled a whole bunch of eggs. And in fact, I went through and I cracked, what have I got going on here? I cracked a handful of them to demonstrate that my process actually works. I don't care. That is not validation. Validation, excuse me, I don't have a pledge point. Validation is knowing that that egg right there is hard boiled without cracking it open. That's validation. And if you don't know that, you can boil an egg, but you'll always be guessing, you know, and we move ahead. Yet, it's a significant emotional event for companies, yet it's a significant business event for companies. I know how to boil an egg, I've cracked a few open to make sure it's right, and I have a very high level of confidence that all those bad boys are boiled without cracking them open. Assertion, assessment, assurance. How does this work out in QBD? Well, let's talk about QBD. You know, there's a whole bunch of ways to look at quality. And we're good as an industry at making lists. Golly, Vic, how long have we been talking about what critical means? Man, let's have some more meetings. Let's multi-vote, okay? And You know, or I was in a discussion last week with our good friends from ISO, and somewhere along the way, I may have been the troublesome Jeff Baker, and I said, do we really need another glossary? Is that really our problem? Is our problem lack of a glossary? But we do need, I think, some thought about meaning. When I go through, and I pulled this, I like this a lot. This is from Dave Garvin's book. There's transcendent quality. I'm not going to read all this to you. There's product-based quality, function of the attributes where better is better, the best you can be. Deming would love it. You know, user-based quality. What does the customer actually need? Manufacturing-based quality, conformance to standards, SPC. Process control, value-based quality, determine whether or not it's worth the money. Okay? Even transcendent quality, which is quality for quality's own sake, you know. And here's the thing, if only one of those were right, we could go slam dunk it. And if some of them were wrong, we could take them off the list. The challenge is that they're all right. Okay? And we use different tools to evaluate those in different contexts and different settings. And we need to think about that. It's not an or, it's an and. And when we look at design, design is about providing an experience. So the question becomes providing an experience for whom? And we have had a lot of discussion and debate about it. And in my experience, it's frequently about providing an experience for my director or vice president. Okay? And I want to give them a good experience. You know, it's giving an experience to the investor. What you are seeing evolve in FDA guidance and the new regulatory paradigms is that it's about the experience that the patient has. The patient does not experience sialic acid content. The patient experiences stability, turnover, PK, PD. Okay, what is the patient's experience? What is clinically relevant? And QBD is saying, I am going to give a high quality experience in a reproducible way. Maybe I'm going to do DOE and that'll be helpful, but that's a tool. Okay, QBD is saying, I'm going to provide a very reliable, high quality experience. This is QBD. I don't know how many thousand years old this stool is, and you know, I can sit my big old Texas hind end on it and be comfortable. It is well designed, it is solid, it is stable, it is simple, and it provides the person sitting on it the experience that they expect to have. There's not a surprise. It's QBD. Now, y'all may be tired of getting hit over the head with stools, so for the engineers here, let's talk about alarm control systems. QBD is just an alarm control system. Data is tracked and monitored in a flow, and every now and again there's a variation. It's a variation of a type that we've predetermined is going to deliver a signal, and then that signal is sorted out as being relevant or not relevant. And then there's a predetermined response to the signal. By the way, if there's not a response, if you just reset the freezer, that's not an alarm control strategy. The alarm control strategy is linking a signal in the data flow to an actual behavior. The merits of an alarm control strategy are not in the number of alarms or in the trigger points that you have. The merits are in the behaviors and the responses to those behaviors that occur. And a good alarm control strategy generates the right behaviors at the right time. How many CPPs do I have to have? You know, there is no such thing as too many or too few. There are appropriate behaviors and inappropriate behaviors, and maybe root cause of the inappropriate behaviors is which IO points you're looking at, okay? But it's about the behaviors and the outcomes. So let's talk about QBD and OBP. This office as I'm in, it's very interesting. We see frequent and increasing use in QBD principles in both initial submissions and supplements. And I think the biotech community is really embracing this, and they're embracing it, frankly, because it makes sense. Approaches are frequently, and not surprisingly, a reflection of the sponsor's approach to life cycle validation. Organizations that embrace and implement the principles of life cycle validation, systemic validation, those are usually the ones where we see a lot of QBD. The folks who look at validation as a point-in-time exercise, when does it begin, when does it end, and how many lots do I have to do? Not so much QBD. We see really good science, but we also see a very broad diversity of practice on how that science is translated into control strategies and behaviors submitted for review. I sat in a really good presentation in Washington where a company came in and showed their QBD strategy, and I got to tell you, I've been